Hi, Connor.
Hello,
It's
Debbie.
it's Debbie. How are you?
Good, very well.
I can't tell you how happy I am to talk with you after watching Let the Wrong One In.
That's good to hear.
I cracked up. I watched it last night. I laughed myself silly. What drew me in first, Connor, was your opening scene and not what was unfolding, but the beauty of the cinematography, the heightened saturation, that gorgeous, the cobblestone streets, the golden glow of lights to the left of screen, and then an inky blue black. It was visually stunning. And that's what caught me first. Your visuals in this film, I am beyond excited by them. You make the most of you and your cinematographer, Michael. You use some great camera angles. A lot of dutching happens. You also vacillate and vary your frame. But then you do what I think is probably 90% in camera with the kills, the blood, spurt and spray.
Yeah.
It's spectacular, Connor.
Oh, wow, that's a good start to the interview. I'm feeling good.
Now I know you've done some darker quote unquote horror films in the past. You've also done some lighter ones, some horror comedies, which are really tough to pull off without becoming just a total slapstick farce. And this is not a slapstick farce. You've got a great story happening here. We've got the themes of the mother and son relationships, the sibling rivalry, which everybody can relate to. And then you've got the big learning curve of Matt growing up and saying what all of us kind of know, but we never want to admit, that half the time we're responsible for our own circumstances because we have to make choices. We've got to take responsibility and make choices. And sometimes we just don't want to do it. And we see this unfold so beautifully. So, I mean, you have just elevated this so much. Where did it all start?
Well, actually, just pretty much on that last point that you made, like, for me, that was a lesson I kind of learned in my maybe late 20s, early 30s, where I'd gone through this, you know, maybe we all have at some point in our lives, people who are a bit manipulative or take advantage of us, and, you know, I think for part of my life, I was always blaming those people, and it was a conversation I had with a friend of mine, and I was talking about a particular person. I was like, "Oh man, they're such an idiot." And I kind of put this scene in the film, and he was going, "Who's an idiot?" And I was going, "This guy is such an idiot." And he'd say, "Who's an idiot?" And he just kept saying, "Who's an idiot?" to me, and it was just in that moment the penny dropped, and it was interesting because it was so freeing to me. I instantly realized that I didn't have to engage in that game. I didn't have to answer the phone. I didn't have to sort of, and it was this freedom I felt from from this particular knowledge that I just gained. And I think for me, it was, I always wanted to share that moment in a movie or in some creative form that I was doing, because it was something that impacted me a lot. And, so I guess I dressed up a whole movie around that moment. But that was definitely the thing that was the compass that I always had in the film, and it was, it kind of kept it on the rails when when because sometimes ideas come in and different things, and people say, "Oh, what about this and this?" And I think it always helped that I knew what it was about.
Well, and especially with a film like this, as you say, things can go off the rails. When you're doing comedy, number one, especially horror comedy, it can easily go off the rails. But the fact that you had such a grounded idea and starting point, a grounded foundation for this, you kept it on track. No pun intended when I think of Anthony's character of Henry. You really kept it on track, and I love that. And we see each character learning and growing, with a few exceptions. Some vampires, there's just nothing you can do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But once
that was almost my thing as well. Sometimes the vampires represented a sort of a force that often, wouldn't change, and that was the thing that you had to accept. And how do you manage that in the world? And it's like sometimes you just have to set your boundaries, or find a way. You can't just, in real life, you can't just stake them. It's not that easy.
As much as I want to sometimes,
Yeah.
Once you knew what your foundation was, and really what your big message wanted to be, what was your process like to sit down and craft this? Because you're writer-director. Yeah. Were you conceiving your visuals at the same time you're writing it? What was your process like, especially developing, these other subtexts of the mother and son dynamic and the brother dynamics, and even a jilted vampire lover dynamic? There's something relatable in there to everybody. So what was your process like?
So, like a lot of the films I've made, the initial kind of I wanted to do a vampire film in Dublin. That was sort of had been in my head for a while, and I didn't quite know in what form. And I think one of the first inspirations was the idea of setting it over the course of a day. Mm-hmm. Like, what if a vampire was trapped in a house? So it was almost like a daylight vampire film, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I think, so I wrote the first draft of that really fast, like maybe in a week or something. But at the time, the vampire and, what is now his brother, they were friends. It was originally two friends. And what kind of, it's interesting what influences the writing process, because what happened is I decided to shoot a promo, this is about 3 years ago, just to try and, even for myself, get a sense of how the comedy would work. And so I did some casting, and we made this 5-minute little promo. But in the casting of that, I found my vampire actor, but I couldn't find anyone to play off him. It's like I was casting all these other mid-20s actors because I was looking for a best friend, and just by chance some wires got crossed, and this young guy, Carl, who was 15 or 14 at the time, came in to read it, and I was like, oh well, he's the wrong age, but I don't want to send him away, and I just brought him in. And it was just in the minute I saw the two of them acting together, and there was something about a younger teenager saying the lines and talking about vampires that just felt, he was kind of excited about the vampire thing, and there was suddenly this other layer to it, and the idea came to me when I saw the two of them. I was like, oh my God, they have to be brothers, because if the stakes were high before, if you're going to stake a friend, but it's like, what about a family member? That's a much harder dilemma. And it was also just, so I went home after that casting, and I rewrote the whole script and I was like, they have to be brothers now. So it's interesting what influences the writing. It's not necessarily just, that sitting at a blank page. It's sometimes you have to go out into the world, and the actors can influence that as well,
You really made the right decision going with brothers, because as you said, it really heightens it. It adds a whole new level. And could you stake your siblings? Yes, I could, but at least a couple of them. But it really creates a dilemma, and this is where your casting was so important because Carl Rice really, as Matt, you see the quandary on his face. He realizes who Deco is, what he is, and you see his quandary. It's like, okay, I got to put an end to this. Can't be a vampire. And then it's like, do I, don't I? What do I do? And it's just wonderful. It's a great emotional moment.
Yeah, it was also that thing I needed, with when you have a comedy duo, you need your straight man as well, to ground the thing. And so that would let, Deco be a little more, he could be a little more out there, but I needed that. Yeah, Carl could be, because I guess he's the emotional core of the film as well. So, so I needed him to be able to. But he's very funny at the same time. There was something about, he always used to just make me laugh at how he took it so seriously, which is what I wanted. But it's like, I always got a kick out of seeing how he'd approach a scene,
He plays everything so straight and so earnestly and sincere, especially your montage with him in vampire killing training with Anthony Heads Henry. I mean, he's so serious, but he's just such a klutz. And you can't help but laugh. But, hand in hand with all of this is all of the kills, the burning flesh, everything we know about vampires. We've got holy water in here. We've got the very, very pointy stake. We've got, well, how do you get a stake pointy? Well, obviously, a lathe works better, but every little trope, everything that we know about vampires from movies and TV, you bring in here. And part and parcel is the great decapitation scenes, fingers get cut off. How did you work all of that in? Were you envisioning this while you were writing? Or did you wait and then say, all right, now I got to figure out how I'm going to execute this?
I think I definitely was thinking about it as I was writing, and I'd almost have to picture when I write sort of an action scene, I wouldn't just write, and they have a fight and ... or whatever. I try to imagine it in very specific terms. And then I did a lot of planning on this movie, and partly we were shut down because of COVID, so I had an extra 6 months planning to do as well. So I made me and the DOP, we basically acted the film out, and sometimes with the real actors and sometimes with friends, and especially those effect scenes, because I knew I was going to be up against it time-wise with the budget and everything, so I knew I needed to know exactly what I needed to shoot, and also there was sometimes a crossover between, we try and do as much practically, but then sometimes it was a crossover with effects and with computers and stuff. So it was really a case of having to know what to do beforehand. But there was a good few in-camera effects as well. So, and that was the interesting thing about having the time to plan, because sometimes the first way we did it, we try it a few different ways in the pre-production. So, when Deco, there's a scene where he's burnt, he comes in the door and he's sort of all scarred and he's burnt, and, initially there was a way where we were going to use computers to heal him again. But actually what we did in the end was, I don't know if you picked up on this, but we basically had a double who was made up as burnt, and we pulled him out of underneath the camera, so you see him, pulled him out of the shot, and then stuck the real actor in, and then he pops up. So the healing kind of happens in the one shot, and there was something just more fun about doing it that way than seeing, because we've all seen, any computer effects I can do, we've probably seen them better in another movie. So if I can find a little trick or an in-camera way of doing it, I think that's always has a little more charm.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that scene, because definitely I knew that was a person. That was a person with great makeup and prosthetics on. And that does make all the difference in the world. It really adds so much. But then you have other scenes, like what would normally be a makeout scene in a bathroom stall is a vampyric makeout scene in a bathroom stall with a conversion happening. You're shooting in tight quarters. You've got introducing blood elements here. Were you using fake blood, or did you use a computer to add all of that in? Because you got a lot of blood happening.
I'd say 90% of the blood is all real. I'm not even sure if I used any, because I kind of don't like CGI blood. I always can spot it. And once I figured out, because the guys who were doing the blood spraying effects, they had an assortment of different tubes, and the minute I saw that working, like, they were my best buddies. I was like, okay, guys, what are we gonna do today? And so and they had little devices that would really help. Like, there's a scene where Deco vomits the blood over Matt, and that was a tube rigged up to the side of his face, but also Deco had a button that he could press, so he could control the spray of blood, so the timing would work out well, so they had little tricks that would help, because some of those shots, you really get one or two goes at it, because then everything is destroyed, so you don't have much leeway to, you can't keep doing those all day.
Well, and obviously this could explain why, for the bulk of the film, once the character of Matt got saturated in blood, you didn't change his shirt anymore. It just stayed.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe how much I debated over whether he should change that shirt or not. And it was like, I was like, should he? And then there was something just nice about having a bloody shirt on him all day, and it's like, but would you change your shirt? And then I was like, then the costume department were putting different t-shirts in his wardrobe, and I was like, I don't know, should they be in there? Because if people see he's got other t-shirts, would he not change? Like, I was like, in the end, it was just it was one of those things nobody really questioned it as to why he didn't change his shirt. I think I might have got away with it.
It reaches a point, once you're covered with blood, it's like, and you're around a vampire, why bother? It's undoubtedly going to happen more during the course of the day. But
actually, that would have been a funny joke. He had to change his shirt and got blood on again immediately.
What I love with using the fake blood is that you've got that one scene where we actually do get some splatter. We get splatter up on the camera with disintegrations and blood spray, and it just adds another textural element to it. I'm very curious, Connor, about how you pulled off the big party scene, the club scene, because when you finally got to shoot, you're shooting in COVID. Ireland, Dublin had restrictions just like the United States. You can only have X amount of people, yet you look totally packed in there. Granted, during setup, I noticed they more than social distanced as they were setting up in this immense space. But I'm curious how you pulled off the actual partying sequence, because that was really well done.
Cool, because that was my big concern actually when we heard about all the COVID restrictions. So, I mean, firstly, that location is actually a Bram Stoker museum, because Bram Stoker is from Dublin, and he lived in that area. So there was something interesting about shooting in a location dedicated to Bram Stoker. So I kind of felt we were in some way in the presence of the old master. And that's one of the scenes, because with the party, the big thing was more like the wider shots and how we were going to fill those. Mm-hmm. And we did end up using a green screen and filming layers of actors and then just combining it for those wider shots. So that, and then just, I guess, the lenses we used and just how we layered the people, we got away with it. So, but it was a real case of like originally having 50 people and then having 15, and having to, how do I just, duplicate or work around that?
No, you pulled that scene off very well, Connor. Very impressive. It really felt like a jam-packed opening night of a club. And your lighting in that scene is terrific. Absolutely terrific. You get all the club kind of strobing and lighting with reds and yellows and the bright spots, but then you also have that gorgeous gothic inky blue black that's happening. It's
Yeah.
so beautiful to look at. I'm curious
So
for you and Michael, your DOP, did you shot list? Did you storyboard? Because you got so much happening here visually in scenes. I have to imagine that you did some storyboarding to work out camera angles, or did you all
oh
just
yeah,
shot list?
I mean, basically, me and Michael almost filmed the film like before we did it. Like what's great about Michael is like I've worked with him a lot from college and stuff. So you don't just get a DOP. It's like he's in. If he's on board your project, he's in. So we like me and him were planning this for a year or so before we shot it. So I do sort of my version of the scene, and then I'd bring them over to him, and he'd sort of look at it, and he'd have an extra eye about maybe what lenses to use and that kind of thing. So, I mean, we meticulously went through the whole film. If we didn't storyboard, we either filmed it like with a camera and some actors, or I had some little animation programs that I do for some of the trickier scenes. And so in a way, I almost had a timeline with a very rough version of the film, which kind of helped with pacing and things. And, even outside the shots, it helped. I mean, it's quite time consuming. I guess with COVID, I just happened to have the time.
Mm-hmm. In other words, you were bored, so this is how you applied yourself.
Oh man, I was like, because it's normally what happens. No matter with the best will in the world, you usually only get your location and your cast very close to filming. So we were shut down a day before we filmed, so we had everything. Like we knew the location and we knew our actors. So I think having the location and then having this extra couple of months meant that we knew what the shots we were planning applied to the location, because sometimes you plan and then you go to the location, you have to throw everything out the window because the room's not the right size or whatever. So at least I think that was a big help as well. We knew that the plan would work.
How challenging was your editing process here? You worked with Brian Philip Davis. I'm curious because you keep this, it's fast paced, it's funny, you slow it down just enough for some of the key moments, especially the third act with Matt and Deco and Ma, or the come to Jesus moments where Matt really blows and lectures Deco and Ma. So I'm curious how challenging it was to find this pace, but still give us moments to breathe and appreciate the story elements.
I think that was a mix of two things. It was probably a mix of initially trying to find that pace in script, I suppose, and those moments. And then, I mean, what was interesting with the editing process was I never even met my editor until about 3 weeks ago in real life because of COVID. We did the whole editing over Zoom, which was, I'd never done that before. It was an interesting process. And like, so he would edit the scenes, and I think for me, because I had such, I suppose we shot a lot of these scenes knowing how we put them together, so part of it was put the pieces of the puzzle together, because we were so short on time. It was really like shoot what we need. And so there wasn't a whole lot of extra material, I think what was great with Brian is when we put the film together, it was longer, it was a half hour longer than we needed. So that was the real thing, that he'd just find ways of trimming little bits here and there. And also he was very good at, there were one or two scenes that we cut, and it's just that thing. It's harder for me to do it, but it's when someone else is saying, I think we really need to cut that, 2-minute chunk of a scene, and making those hard decisions. But I would say that there wasn't a massive amount of reorganizing of the the film. I think the end of Act 2 was probably the moment that was a bit of like leeway, or you know, it was had the most room to kind of try and figure out how to make that work. But yeah, it was.
Well,
it's like editing. You dive in and just it's kind of a case of how does it feel. I mean, the thing we didn't have on this, which I missed, was a test screening for COVID. We didn't get that opportunity because sometimes you just have to play it with an audience, feel it, you know. And so it meant us kind of just showing it to people we knew, you know, individually or one-on-one, and kind of gauging it that way.
well, you definitely hit your comedy beats. You hit your emotional beats. You did not suffer at all by not having test screenings with audiences. I'm just curious, before I let you go, Connor, this is so wonderful talking to you about this film because I love it so much. I had to watch it immediately last night as soon as Daniela sent me the link. I'm curious. This is now your, fourth or fifth feature now, and shooting it under extraordinary circumstances. What did you learn about yourself as a filmmaker, as a writer-director, in making Let the Wrong One In, that you will now take forward into your future projects?
I think, I mean, the planning thing was definitely a big help, like, because I realized, like, I made some, like, big script decisions in that extra 6 months, just, like, reorganizing things. So I really feel having a good plan and just getting your head around the script was a big thing. I think the other one is what we were talking about at the beginning, is having that personal connection with a film to make it feel like it's worthy to spend 2 or 3 years of your life, which it's going to take, that you feel like you've something worth saying, but also something that you understand in some kind of intimate way, that you feel you've the authority to say this, you know. So for me, like, even in the scripts I'm looking for, I think in the past I would have done something just because of the fun of it. Whereas I feel now, even though, like, obviously, like, I love a good piece of entertainment more as anyone else, but just for myself, I think maybe it's just getting older, you know, you kind of feel like it just needs that extra element to make the project worthwhile. And it's like, what? And it doesn't have to be saying something big or dramatic, but it's more something about humanity that I feel like I've learned myself, and I want to just encode in the film in some way. So I think that's definitely what I'm looking for, and definitely I feel helps the project, because it means I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm trying to say, or I know, and that filters through everything, and being able to talk to the actors and being able to, you know, talk to anyone about the film. So I guess there's out of that comes a kind of a confidence to tell that story if you've sort of made a personal connection with it.
Well, you definitely made a personal connection with this one that extended to me when I saw it. Job so well done, Connor. I want more. I want to see more.
Well, hang in there, I'm working on it.
Oh, Connor, thank you. This has been such a delight, and I hope we get to do this again in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. That was great.
Thanks, Connor. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.